The Demon Lover by Elizabeth Bowen. Probably the most interesting title of anything we read this entire year. The Demon Lover. Doesn't that sound like something you want? Wow, holy cow, what kind of movie is that going to be? You know? This one particular, we're not going to spend as much time talking about her as a writer so much as kind of the things that she did and what was famous for. She wrote post-World War II, well, mostly World War II, but her settings were of that time period. And so when we talked about the introductory information about the breaking apart of the British Empire and what that would be like and the bombings of London, people were still living in London. And so they would leave and go live out in the country where who's going to go bomb farmhouses? They're going to bomb cities. And so they would board up their houses. And so she, in this particular piece, it's focusing on the protagonist goes back every once in a while into the city to get some things from her boarded up house and then go back out. And it talks about the rows of being very deserted because a lot of people are doing that. So you can kind of imagine what a vacant rows of houses and houses, kind of ghost towny, how that would feel. All right, that era of feeling maybe not just scared but alone, it would be very pervasive. So one of the other things she really focused on was she included, you can tell by the title, a lot of supernatural qualities and elements in her writing. So based on the title, you might be able to figure out, okay, something's crazy is going to happen, and it really does. The payoff at the end is stuff that makes this really interesting. And the main premise, not giving too much away, is not only does she go back, but she shows up at a house that no one knew that she was going to show up. It talks about a caretaker who is kind of like a house sitter, but the bunch of houses around this street share this one caretaker. He doesn't live there, he just checks on it every once in a while. Nowadays we have it, hey, check my house, make sure the pipes didn't explode, make sure my cat's fed, things like that. So, that type of thing. You might have that with the neighbors when you go out of town. And so this particular place, nobody knows, even the caretaker, that she's going to show up. So she shows up, gets her stuff, and she looks around. All of a sudden there's a letter that she finds laying there addressed to her with no stamp. If there's a letter with no stamp, can it be mailed? No. It means somebody set it there. And so all of a sudden she starts reading this letter, and it shows up that it was from her fiancé of 25 plus years ago when she was a young lady. And it was not a very happy memory of her parting from this person. And all of a sudden she realizes this guy went off to fight the war, and it was reported that he was dead. And now, how did this thing show up? And then all of a sudden, being in this boarded up house with hardly any light, she realizes she is not alone in this house. And I don't want to give too much away, but we'll just kind of start the story with that. So again, the main thing to focus on in here are those elements of the setting that takes place. And again, obviously, supernatural elements and qualities will be obvious, but the setting of what London is like during this era is a good representation of the literature from this time period. Okay, so we are talking about The Demon Lover by Elizabeth Bowen. Demon Lover. So you get to the very end, and it doesn't look like a very positive outcome for this one particular woman. I don't want to we already kind of talked about the end, but the very beginning, if you go back to the very beginning of this particular story, it talks a little bit about that background that I mentioned, the streets of London bombing and how people come back and forth. But heading into that house for the very first time in a long time to get some stuff, she finds this letter. And this plot really does build, there's some flashbacks to help paint the picture of the past of her as a young woman, and then we are brought back to the future and realize that this letter could have more significance. It's really quite an interesting an idea of a horror movie if we were to see something nowadays. Do you ever see the movie Scream? Yeah. There were a whole bunch of other ones, but the very first one, I think the intro to the movie was a younger Drew Barrymore was on the phone, and it was like, I see you, things like that. And she gets worried, oh, okay, who's playing a prank? Then it goes, and this was the scariest line, I'm in the house. What? And then she runs and something comes flying out from a closet, or was looking at her. But the notion that all of a sudden, oh, things are fine, then you're not alone, that there's somebody else here. It's kind of freaky. You know what I mean? And imagine when it talked about, she walked into this hospital for this time, it talked about the dead air greeted her. And so it was really stale, and there wasn't much circulation going on. And have you ever walked around like the school by yourself when it's dark? Or buildings that you shouldn't be in and it's by yourself? There's nothing freaky about the school. But when all the lights are off and you're the only one here, which hopefully you're never the only one here because that would really be weird, there's an ominous mood to it, like, I'm all by myself. And it's kind of strange. And so she's all by herself, and she's there to just pick up some stuff to take back out for her family out in the country when she starts to read this letter. And it says, oh dear, I'm sure you remember today's our anniversary. What? Surely you remember our anniversary. Today it is. And remember when I said that we were going to get together again down the road? Well, that's happening. And I'm sorry that you left London. That was sad for me, but I'm glad that you came back. I knew you would. Nobody knew that she was coming back. This letter was sitting there for her. It talked about in here how the caretaker, the house sitter who checks in from time to time, he hadn't been there in a long time, she could tell. And he didn't know she was coming. And the mail, if he would have seen it, he'd have pocketed it and brought it to her in the country, or the next time he saw her. There was no stamp on it, so it just, somebody said it right here. She takes the letter, she goes up to her room, almost like maybe a child or a little girl wants to go and read something, or go read her diary, or anybody. The safest part of your house, place of your house, is probably your bedroom. You feel the most comfortable. It's where you spend the most amount of time. Whether you're awake or not, you spend the most amount of time in there, I would imagine. And so she feels a calmness there. And then that's where the flashback happens. And if you jump to page 1300, go there with me, please. 1300, down at the bottom. And what had just tipped her off was that the letter had a date, and it was today's date. And that sends her back into thinking about this one particular person, and we find out it was her fiancé. Now, they didn't have a very romantic love affair by any means. He was a soldier going off to war, and something very unique happens. He takes her hand and he presses it against the button of his uniform. And when it hurts her, he just keeps pushing harder. That seems a little like demented, demonic, wrong. And she found herself absently looking at it and rubbing it later, so it was hard enough to produce a scar. Any of you guys have scars and you kind of forget where they came from? Yeah. And so I've heard some people say they break their leg, and then years down the road they can't remember which leg they broke. You know what I mean? It's just one of those things you just kind of move on. But she looked at it, and all of a sudden you're flooded back. And it talked about how the fog that cleared from 25 years, and all of a sudden she remembered. She remembered outside him saying goodbye, and there was no kiss. There wasn't anything hot and passionate about their departure. This is the one thing she really remembered. And he said, I'll be back. And if you look on the next page, 1302, hearing her cold catch her breath, her fiancé said, without feeling, cold? You're going away such a long way. Not so far as you think. I don't understand. You don't have to. You will. You know what we said. But that was, suppose you people going off to war, you're fearful that they're going to what? Die. Thank you. Let me hang. They think they're going to die. Well, we're talking about a future together. But then he says that maybe he's not going to be as far away as she thinks. All of a sudden we come back, and I think these are elements of foreshadowing for us. Because at the bottom of this page, it says that Kathleen behaved well when, some months later, her fiancé was reported missing, presumed killed. So if somebody's reported missing, presumed killed, is there a body? Usually no. Otherwise, wouldn't you be able to tell?
Yeah.
Okay. So if we saw that. And so we have this uncertainty about the future, and then he's presumed dead. Okay, well, move on. And so she moves on, and everybody was like, boy, you're handling this well. Well, she wasn't really in love with him. You know, she was kind of just forced upon him, forced upon her. That pain comes back to mind in her hand, pressed on the button. And so she finally moves on. When she finally gets into her 30s, so about 15 years later, she meets a man and gets married and has kids, and lives here in this house, but out in the country right now because of the bombings. And so he was sent away during the Great War, World War I. And now time has passed, and we're in the middle of World War II, and it looks like somebody has come home looking for her. And if he was dead, this would be a ghost. It's kind of weird in that supernatural lining up of the date, that particular date. No one was going to know she was there. So those are the supernatural qualities. And this is where she got kind of worried that I'm not alone in this house. When she comes back to reality on this next page, she goes to the edge of the stairs and listens in the hallway. There's nothing. I don't hear anything. But all of a sudden, the breeze is different. There's a cool breeze. Something is causing a draft. And then she figured out, that the door to the basement has just opened and closed. Meaning somebody has just decided to leave. If this were a movie, wouldn't you be getting a little, building up? Oh my gosh, there's some history there, and there's something going on in this house. And she goes, I'll call a taxi. Well, I can't do that because the phones are dead. Of course, right? Like a movie. You lift it up. Oh my gosh, there's no dial tone, right? All of that stuff. There's no cell reception. Oh my gosh, right? Well, she didn't have cell phones. I don't want to confuse some people putting on the test. Where's the cell phone at? And so anyways, she finally does leave, composes herself, walks down the streets, fine, sees some cabs, heads to one, and it's not moving, so it's like it's perfectly for her. She gets in, closes the door, it takes off. It starts driving around. It takes her a moment before she realizes, I didn't say where I was going. So you knock on the window, I'm her now. Knock on the window, the guy opens the glass, slams the brakes. So what happens if somebody slams the brakes? He goes forward, right up into that opening of the glass. He turns, they're about that far away, and she just stares. And then this last paragraph or so is just really, that's the great movie ending. She just starts screaming because who does she see? She recognizes the face. Because she thinks back 25 years, she doesn't know what the dude looks like. There's a description of it. It's like you take acid and drop a drop of acid on a picture, and it eats the face away. She doesn't really remember. She's moved on to life. She has kids. She's married. She starts screaming and pounding, falling back in her seat. And then if you look at the last few lines that this car accelerates, the words "without mercy." Is it going to stop to see what's going on? Are you okay back there? Without mercy? No. It takes off, excuse me, and it made off with her into the hinterland, and here we go, of deserted streets. Not overly populated, where people will see somebody filling, down through city streets where everybody has evacuated. So you can almost imagine taking her to maybe some warehouse or something. It doesn't look like it's going to end happily, And we bring in, again, those setting elements and put it back into the historical context of the bombings. But then other than that, I think it's just a pure, enjoyable thriller to some degree, where you really get to see her kind of go through, oh my gosh, things are worried. Usually things play out okay. But in a horror story, it just builds, and then you aren't alone. Oh good, I got away. Didn't you think she was just going to go? Everything's fine, get a cab, awesome. And then all of a sudden, there he is on their anniversary. And what's really interesting is that it said, where was it? Oh, right when she got in the car. It says, without looking around, the driver started the engine. As she panted up from behind and put her hand on the door. As she did so, the clock struck 7. So the moment she was there, which if you recall back to the letter, it talked about a certain time at the appropriate hour. And she was worried because the bell struck 6 when she was back in her room. Well, it's not going to be this hour. When's it going to be? And I don't even know what the guy's going to look like. It's easier to avoid somebody if you know what they look like. How are you going to avoid somebody if you don't even know what they look like? Strangers could be that particular person. That'd be a freaky way to go about life. And so then between 6 and 7, all of that stuff happens. She gets to the car. The bell starts ringing 7, and that's when the climactic occurrence there at the very end. So I hope you enjoyed it, but again, really brings it to heart a great setting of what visually it would have been like to live there, and now you know why to live in London and the deserted streets, connecting that to, well, did they just go bankrupt and move out like Detroit? No, this was because of the bombings. So it kind of brings that back full circle to the historical relevance of this piece. Okay?